It's my pleasure to introduce Heather Duncan, who's the Dean of Education at Brandon University, and her topic this morning for the next 45 minutes will be rigorous learning by distance.
Thank you. Well, thank you. We've got a nice, small, select company here, and I welcome any questions throughout the presentation. I think we should just have a dialogue about anything that comes up of interest. So I am currently Dean of Education at Brandon. Came there from Winnipeg, where I was a professor at the University of Wyoming. Before that, I was a principal at Erickson Collegiate, and before that, I was a chemistry teacher in Scotland. So I've been an educator all my life and enjoyed most of it, and I'm very committed to it. I became interested in online learning, about 15 years ago, when I did my master's and was presented with an internet course that I didn't even have internet on my computer. So I had a steep learning curve, and it really, piqued my interest. So, as university professors, we always say that time to do research is very difficult. So I tend to research my own practice so that my research informs my practice and my practice informs my research. So this research stemmed out of a group of educational leadership professors at the University of Wyoming talking about blended learning and talking about what worked and what didn't. And we had a good discussion, but there was dissension. And in that dissension came the word rigor. And one person said, well, I think my courses are really rigorous. That's why students are complaining about them and finding them difficult. So I said, well, what do students think? Why do they find these courses difficult? And what do they think the word rigor means? So this was a blended learning course. Students would come on campus, or we would go out to a satellite site for 3 weekends, and in between they would have, each week they would have a different topic online using various formats. So the rationale for the study was, we teach students face-to-face, and we know if they're engaged. We know our courses are rigorous, but online, do we know they're engaged? Do they think our courses are rigorous? What's happening out there? How do they perceive their learning in this environment? So, I've got a question for you. What do you think constitutes rigorous learning?
Well, I think learning it's not just an academic exercise. It carries an emotional content, and we just spent 4 days talking and learning about Aboriginal Indigenous perspectives.
Right. With
our trustees, and that was.
I'm going to come closer so that you'll pick up my mic.
That was rigorous learning for all of us in the room, because we were drained after we had finished those every day, and because it carried such an emotional punch to the learning. So rigorous learning is not just about academia or making sure that you've got all your the correct formats and function, all the scholarly piece of it, but there's the rigor of incorporating new learning into your whole being, and that's rigorous learning of a different kind.
No, I'm in agreement. I think that's good. So rigorous learning is learning that you incorporate into your whole being. Okay.
I would say intellectual engagement would be a component of it.
Intellectual engagement, yes.
Intellectual engagement insofar that it takes the learner beyond just the core rudimentary components that the course requires, and do some additional thinking about it and possibly exploration around it. And intellectual engagement is tough enough to promote in a regular face-to-face setting among students. So I can imagine it would be a bit of a challenge in this kind of setting as well.
Okay, so intellectual engagement and encouraging students to go further and explore. Okay.
Yes.
Anything else? Robin?
I would say you get rigorous learning when the student knows what he knows and can talk about what he knows and relate it to his professional practice and, as necessary, his personal experience. Can articulate what he or she knows.
Okay, so articulation of what he or she knows and relating it to personal and professional experience. Anything else?
When they can put it on practice.
Okay, when they can put their learning into practice, yes? Okay, well, let's move on. So what did the literature say about rigor? And in the United States, everything you read about No Child Left Behind, the word rigor is in capital letters. But what actually does it mean? So when I researched this subject, I came up with two definitions. One, rigor as in rigorous research, and the other, rigor as in academic quality. So I'm not going to read all these, but you can see a rigorous research adheres to strict codes of context, practice, challenges and builds upon existing knowledge, combines theory, concept, and practice. So, when you think of the word rigor, it means stiff, unbending. What comes to mind is rigor mortis. So, the term rigorous, what does it actually mean when we talk about rigorous learning? We certainly don't want it to be stiff and inflexible. So rigor as academic quality, coursework that is challenging, demanding or difficult, requires a large amount of time. A highly personalised element of the teaching-learning partnership, and a set of standards not only for students, but for academic institutes. So my research questions, I wanted to look at rigor in relation to course structure. How did the structure of the online component relate to learning and to student perceptions of rigor? Second question was, how do students operationally define rigorous learning, and what do rigorous learning assignments look like? Methodology was, first of all, a short survey online sent out to students in 4 different classes, all graduate classes. Very short, about 8 questions, asking them about the clarity, organisation, expectations, learning, and perceived rigour of the course. And that came up with very surprising results. So we instituted a phase 2, which was to create focus groups of student volunteers to actually ask them in person once they'd had time to reflect about it. So these are the questions in the semi-structured group protocol. What does rigour mean to you in the context of graduate education? What factors contribute to rigorous courses? And what do rigorous assignments look like? 44 participants out of 88, which gave a 50% response rate, which was reasonable. All of these were, they were all practicing educators, there were teachers, there were principals, there were people from the State Department, superintendents, a wide variety. And all of them were either in a master's, a principal certificate, an ED or a PhD program. All except one were fully employed, so these were all part-time students doing this while they were working. And the average travel time, because Wyoming is very like Manitoba, it's spread out, there are empty spaces. The average time students traveled to classes was 4 hours, which was why we incorporated this online component. Some students actually traveled 7 hours to get to the weekend classes. So the findings. Research question 1, the relationship between the course organisation, learning and rigour. Oops. So here are the 4 classes, A, B, C and D. And as you can see, rigour was perceived the same in all of them. But that's the only similarity. There was one outlier, Class B. Learning, organisation, clarity of expectations were all deemed less than clear in this class. Time spent per week, again, was fairly consistent, between 2 and 3, well, between 2 hours and 3 hours a week. So I did a Pearson's correlation between these variables. And what we find is really no or a very low correlation between rigor and learning. What is going on here? A high correlation between clarity of expectations and learning, high correlation between course organisation and learning, and a medium correlation, but negative between time spent and organisation. So that what that tells you is that the more organised the course, the less time students have to spend navigating it, and the less frustrated they become. So this was the focus group. How do graduate students operationally define rigorous learning? And so this is what they defined it as, which is quite similar to what you in this room have defined it. This was after a conversation, okay, what's going on here? Why do you think rigor is not related to learning? So they said rigor is exploring topics outside our knowledge base comfort level, which you introduced. That challenges to think critically and go beyond assumptions. So it's not always comfortable, it engages the emotions. Digesting theory and relating it to practical applications, which was also mentioned. Questioning our beliefs. We all have this deep set of assumptions, and it's going beyond that to question, okay, do I really believe this? It's a collaboration among students and the instructor in which new knowledge is created. It's closely related to the extent to which the assignment or project creates a significant learning experience. And I'll go into later what students thought were significant learning experiences. It's of long-term significance to our own learning and adds value to our ability to influence our school communities. A lot of our students were teachers, and they had no real purpose in going forward to be educational administrators. But what they said was, after doing our masters or whatever, we feel we've become far better classroom teachers because it challenges us to think about our beliefs. Did you have a question, Roy? Right. Okay, so what do rigorous assignments look like? Well, they have a deep personal interest. So they allow students to connect theory to practice. So they can take the theory that they've learned in class and say, okay, this is how it looks in my school, my district, my classroom. Future implications as a school leader. So they relate to what they need to know in school leadership. Autonomy at inception, and I questioned what really they meant by that, but students wanted some input and some flexibility to make the assignment fit their needs, so it didn't become something they had to do, but something that they could actually use in their buildings. And that we found was the most significant finding. Students would work and put in hours as long as it was relevant to what they were doing. Requires one-on-one interaction with the instructor, and that was an interesting point, because online usually there is more interaction between students and instructors on a one-to-one basis, because the instructor will reply individually to students. And they really valued that. So it really is saying instructor presence is very important, because we want to interact with our instructor online, which again brings into consideration the MOOCs that we're seeing where students will react with each other, but they're not reacting with the instructor. So all learning is going on is at a student level. And, you know, it's exciting. Where it's going to go, I don't know. And it's embedded, assignments are embedded in both theory and practice. Examples of rigorous assignments that can be completed in a distance format. So the students identified alternative assignments to a term paper because I expect all of those of you who teach in universities, especially in ed leadership programs, find that students question the relevance of a term paper unless they can relate it to practice. So a literature review is good, but they want to relate it to practice. So their ideas included was PowerPoints or Prezi presentations, which can be very readily done in a distance format. And one quote was, every time we get up and teach something that is relevant, we hone our knowledge about the subject and practice presenting in front of large groups. Technology allows us to do this. More and more our presentations, just like today, are broadcast to a wider audience, and we can reach more people than are actually in the room. Blogs, they found that creation of a school leadership blog, which was one assignment, was a really enlightening experience for them because they got a lot of feedback from their teachers, their students about it, and it engaged more people in the conversation about education and learning. So, I must have missed one of it. No? So going back to the literature, we see that how it was defined there, and we see it's not rigorous research and academic rigor are really they're really closely related. Though they're addressed as different subjects in the literature, we can see that there's a lot of relationship. The one that I am going to really take issue with is the large amount of time. I don't think a rigorous assignment needs to take a large amount of time, but students perceived in this class initially that the more time they were required to put into a course to complete assignments, the more rigorous it was. When they thought about it, they came up with other ideas. But if we look at it, it's challenging, it combines theory and practice, it's a set of standards for us all, not just for our students, and it's challenging. It encourages people to go beyond their boundaries. Oops. So there's not all that much difference between rigorous research as defined and academic rigor, and it really ties into what students were saying. Additional findings. The quality of the instruction was the most important component. What students said was, it doesn't matter what format our class is in. If it's by video, if it's face-to-face, if it's online, it's that relationship we have with our instructor that makes that class a positive experience. Especially in an online environment, courses must be well organized. Students don't want to waste a lot of time going here, there, searching for what they need to know and not finding it and becoming really frustrated in the process. It must have clear expectations so that students know what they've got to do, but they have the flexibility to do it in a way that is significant for them. And they found the online component really valuable because it was a way to interact with peers, listen to others' perspectives, and to bridge the gap between monthly weekend classes. When I first went to Wyoming, I was there for 8 years. All the classes were on campus. They were intensive weekends, Friday night 6 to 9, Saturday 8 to 5, Sunday 12 to noon. Well, you can imagine that Sunday was a disaster. Everyone was brain dead. by 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, people were brain dead. So gradually what we did was we shortened these intensive weekends and made them 3 hours on the Friday night, which were always wonderful, 8 till 2 on a Saturday, just the right time so that they could go home, and on these long drives home they could reflect on their learning, and they usually carpooled, so they said the conversations on the way home were as valuable as the class time. And this is another, this one slide has got misplaced. Another assignment that was deemed effective was developing a personal learning resource. So, you know, when they had to do something that incorporated their learning, that reflected the theory, it was very important. And also research projects. I apologise, I'm out of sync. So, conclusion. Rigour to graduate students means instruction should relate theory to practice. It must be value added. And so it can't just be disseminating facts. It must engage them in thinking. It's a partnership. Especially online, instructors need to provide an organised environment so students can become engaged before that frustration factor comes in, because at a distance that frustration factor can make or break the success of a course, and students actively explore and extend boundaries. So that's my little project in a nutshell. Are there any questions?
We did similar courses quite a few years ago in the master's cohort. In fact, Robin was often one of the professors where we did the weekend.
Yep.
The weekend traveling. Professors came to Cranberry, I believe it was.
Right.
And a number of folks traveled in, following very much the same format.
Right.
As what you're describing.
Yeah, because I think as we look at graduate courses and as we look at undergraduate courses as well, because our population that we have to reach now is no longer just that 18 to 22 age group that can have education, full-time. We've got mature students coming back, changing careers, who want a more flexible form of education. I think graduate education has really geared up to create environments in which people who are working can be successful. Undergraduate education has a long, long way to go to become more flexible. Yes, Robin?
Something I've been playing around at the edges with, but I don't have enough knowledge to make it work, is a program called MindMeister.
Right.
MindMeister is, these plants that grow in pots, and they throw out arms
Yes.
that end up with spiders on the end.
Right, a spider plant, yes.
There we go, spider plants. But this is a program that enables you to send out arms that are connections of your ideas. So that if you don't know the direct line, the normal linear configuration of A leads to B leads to C leads to D, which is the way we traditionally teach.
Right.
You begin in the beginning, you find a middle point, and then you work towards the end. Sometimes our ideas just grow like wildfire.
Right.
Well, MindMeister is a way of allowing you to take bigger ideas, a little smaller ideas, related ideas, and then you can go backwards and you can thicken up lines that were very thin before. You can resuscitate ideas that were flowers that were dying on the vine. You can do all these things on a two-dimensional screen.
Right.
And I suspect there's a way of doing that with a whole community, so that a whole community can ideate about or develop ideas about a topic or something
Right.
that's working together. I can see it, I don't know how to do it. And I get updates from MindMeister all the time, keep sort of tantalizing kinds of things, but I don't know how to get there. And I really would like to know how to get there. Anyway, in terms of generating other ways of, or using ITC to expand our potentials within these distance ed courses.
Right.
And yeah, that's just a, I
And
don't have an answer to
no.
it, I just have a question.
But I think more and more distance learning is becoming multidimensional. It's no longer either face-to-face or online. We have the capacity to communicate synchronously now. We can see each other, and I can see that this is just going to become more and more over the next few years as technology advances.
I think Dave Cormier has written, it's not his theory, but he proposes it quite extensively, that concept of rhizomatic learning, as it regards to exactly that process of what they've observed in the MOOCs. I don't know if that would help. Do you know what I mean? Because it's that concept of
Rhizomatic is a good word for it.
Yeah. So we've just been talking about the concept of rhizomatic learning. Could you expand a little more about that, Kelly?
I'm not an expert. I just sort of, I'm a lurker in sort of that whole world of MOOCs, right? But I mean, as proposed by Dave Cormier, but he's not the proponent of rhizomatic. I can't remember who's coined it. Unfortunately, my lit isn't that good. But what he's, somebody want to Google it there.
Okay.
But what he's talking about, that is that collaborative process. Like, I mean, George Siemens, he's sort of countering it to Siemens' argument of connectivism. And what he's saying is this is a more defined way of looking at that idea of connectivism, is that we're learning in pods and we're all contributing to the pods, and then the pods will come back. Right. So that we each have our individual pathways that we can center around an object or an interest, right? Because with MOOCs, it's all about centering your learning around an object, just like any kind of social media works, right? It's all built around an object. So you're learning you're starting with that pod around the object that then can expand out to all of these other connections, and so you can leave your rhizome as it were to go to another, right? Or to go to another depending on how your interest branches. So you have these subject area experts that are coming in and out of groups all of the time because you've got these different sort of groups. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a good explanation. Thanks.
Just a question. In your presentation, you talk about the importance of face-to-face meetings, for instance, the weekend component, which is the attribute to the online learning. How do you foster and maintain rigor when you don't have to have the face-to-face component? Because there are obviously a lot of courses where you quickly do it online without the face-to-face.
Well, I think first of all you've got to build that community. And I often find in completely online courses, because I've taught those as well, that students will give away a lot more about themselves if they have the opportunity than they will in a situation like this. I usually start off my classes by asking them to write a poem, and I've got a format for it, where I'm from. And it knocks some people out of their comfort zone, but the amazing things that students write in these poems. I had one student who had in previous classes who wrote about being ADHD. I had no idea he was ADHD and how he was on medications and what a hard time he had in grade school because of this and the trouble he got into. And here was the most reflective, calm, I thought, person, but yet, this was lurking underneath. I had another student who talked about when he was in school, his teachers, one of his teachers had told him he would never amount to anything. Now, this was a guy who was probably early 40s, and he had carried this teacher's comment with him right through his career. And as teachers, we really have got to be cognizant of what we say to students, because even though sometimes we don't think it, they do take our words to heart. And so you learn a lot about, you can learn a lot about students online if you give them the opportunity. Teaching online, I find, is a lot more work than teaching face-to-face, especially if the classes are 20 plus. But it can be very rewarding, and once you get that sense of community going, it helps a lot because students will respond to each other, but they want their instructor to be there. You know, they want to see instructor presence as well. So I think it's just making those connections. What I'd like to do a study of is, do students who know each other face to face respond more to the people they know in an online environment? And I have all my past WebCT courses still, and I want to go back and just do an interaction web, and see if that plays out. You know, if they've got that face-to-face connection, do they tend to gravitate towards people they know, or do they go beyond and talk with everyone? But yeah, I think building that community is key, and structuring things so that they can actually say, okay, this is what the theory says, this is how it looks in my working environment, my professional environment. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, we will call it a day, and thank you very much for your conversation. It's nice to have a small group.
On behalf of the group, Mern and Kossel, we'd like to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And here's a small token.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.